Hi, everybody. Welcome to the IC Topic Chat. Today's August 15th. If you are like me and you have children going back to school, you're either celebrating or crying, or you're doing a little bit of both. When our kids are now in high school and in college, and when they were in like elementary school, it was called the woohoo, boo-hoo celebration. They would do that at the elementary school. But anyway, so here we are, August 15th, and we've got Valerie Ehrlich here to talk with us today about managing AI and client consultant relationships. You can see that that's up on the screen right there. So Valerie, take it away. We're glad to have you.
Hey, all right, thank you. So I pitched this topic to Matt a couple weeks ago um, because I came across a foundation that has like a ban on AI, and I was like, oh wow, what would that look like if I wanted to work with them? How would I factor that in? Obviously, if they didn't want me to use it, I wouldn't use it. But like, do we need to be protecting our right to use it if it's really adding all these efficiency gains and stuff like that? So I just kind of started thinking a lot about managing AI, how we talk about it, how we use it in this sort of client consultant relationship space beyond like just looking at use cases. And so I thought it would be a good conversation for us to have here. And I was really curious to hear how other people have been managing it, what sorts of discussions have been coming up, and things like that. And so that was sort of the impetus for the topic. And so I was excited to get to, oh wait, I have to accept the recording. Was excited to bring in a couple of additional experts. So in the interim, I've been working on adding in some contract language around AI to my contracts. And so I've been working with my lawyer, Caitlin, who's joining us today to offer some of her insights. And then I also attended Brad's, I believe it was with the NLP Community of Practice, a evaluation life cycle with AI training that I highly recommend. It was really good. And so I asked him to join as well. And I think he's going to chime in for a bit. And I know he's getting ready for some paternity leave, so I appreciate his time being here today too. So we're going to get some other perspectives as well as we think about this topic. So a little bit about my AI story. I find it helpful to hear other people's AI story. I was a skeptic. I was pretty bummed there was yet another technology that I apparently needed to learn. I feel like I missed the boat on R and I'm never going to get there. So it was just kind of like, the world is moving on and I am not. But then the headlines finally got to me. Then I became curious. Like many of you, I think I asked it for a recipe or something like that. I used it when planning a vacation. And then I experimented with, it was right at our annual review time at my old organization. And I was like, sitting there thinking, how am I going to put together like the organizational strategy and goals with like my job description and what I've done the past year and all of that. And I thought that could be something AI could help with. And it totally helped me bring those things together and develop my goals for the year. And so I started to shift. I had a real mindset shift around the idea of thought partnering with it. Which is where I started to kind of transition to that, getting pretty amazed by what it could do, kept it open on my computer all the time, just went to it with stuff. Some of it didn't work, some of it did. But I found that people started coming to me and asking for help, asking, how do I use this? What might I do? And so recently, in the past year, I've developed a couple of different trainings, mostly for a nonprofit audience. And I'm really focused now on sort of thinking about the tail end of tech adoption. And, we have a lot of folks that are maybe aware of it, but haven't had a chance to experiment or haven't experimented particularly well. And so we have that sort of long tail of folks that I would hate to be left behind in this current tech moment. So I'm trying to think about training specifically to bring them along. So that's sort of where I've gone over the past year or so. Okay, and click forward. Or can I? No, okay. So when we think about AI uses for independent consulting, over on the left, like there's a ton of things that AI, and I'm referring to mostly generative AI. I think there are tons of we could probably go many different directions with other types of AI, but thinking about all the different tasks within the evaluation lifecycle that it can help with. And Brad's session is a great one talking through some of this. There are some things online where there's this discussion is happening. And then also there's sort of like the running the business side, and thinking about using AI for some proposal responses or adapting different materials, automated note taking, and things like that. That's a little bit more on the business side. So I wanted to kind of take a step back from the sort of how we do what we do and how we run our business and consider kind of the bigger implications of that. So next slide, please. So in that taking this step back, I was thinking about like, well, what is the consultant-client relationship and how might it be influenced by the use of AI, and what are the things we should really attend to if we're going to be using AI? And so some key components that I think we all have experienced throughout our work in independent consulting are the need to build trust, and we really value trust to do this collaborative, strategic level work that we want to be doing, to be trusted with data and with insights. There's a sense of value that what we're doing offers great value to the organizations that we're partnering with, and quality that we do a very good job with the work that we do, and we deliver high quality products, reports, findings, insights back to our clients. And so I wanted to kind of hold those three parts of the consultant-client relationship at the core of looking at AI. Next slide, please. Matt, can you do the next one, please?
I just did. You're
Oh,
not seeing it?
thank you. Yes, there it is. Okay. And so when thinking about AI and consulting and those sort of three underlying components of the consultant-client relationship, then we can sort of bucket out what might be the ways that AI would come up and how should we be thinking about it. So a big issue with AI is going to be around preserving quality and expertise. So finding that balance between, efficiency and our own expertise that we've built up over the years, and where that comes in. Protecting data and managing liability is a huge issue, and understanding what's happening with the data that goes into it and really being able to ensure client security. Transparency and client communication. So thinking about how we communicate our AI use. And also, I think there's an opportunity to use discussions about AI as a trust building moment with our clients to be transparent in our communication. And then thinking about our own education at this moment in terms of how are we going to stay up to date and aware of the advancements with AI so that we can speak to them. So I'm going to use those thank you, to look through these different these different lenses on sort of the macro AI and consultant client relationships issues. So with regard to preserving quality and expertise, like I said, a lot of the use of AI is going to be centered on balancing the efficiency with our oversight and our insight and our expertise. And so AI can speed things up, but faster evaluation is not necessarily better evaluation. And I have linked in one of the resources a really, really good document that looks at AI use in evaluation and talks more in depth about this particular issue too. It would also be important to be thinking about what are the different processes, how might we review and validate what we're generating, and really critically, a lot of us have done a lot of work on our sort of our niche area and our brand, and we equally would want to make sure we're maintaining our own voice and our professional intuition in terms of using AI. And so, next slide, please. So for each of the topics I have sort of generated, because I'm not at all claiming to be an expert in this space. I'm wading into it along with all of you. So I used AI to think about the three components of trust, value, and quality in client-consultant relationships and consider the point of view of clients as a stakeholder and consultants as a stakeholder, and help think about what might be some of the questions that might come up from the client point of view, and what sorts of questions should the consultant be considering if they're embarking on using AI in their work. And so from the client point of view, we can think about how, like, the client potentially asking, how are you going to ensure the accuracy of these results? If AI is doing some of the work, are we still getting the full value of your expertise? How does AI impact the rigor and validity of the evaluation methodology? And how does it enhance rather than replace the consultant's professional judgment? So those might be questions that they might have. And on the consultant side, some things to think about that I've been thinking about a lot and would love to hear what folks who are using AI are also considering are the different processes that can be implemented to verify and validate the AI generated outputs, how you're able to articulate with clients the balance between efficiency and expertise, how we're demonstrating the added value of AI and what it's really enabling you to do, how it's being integrated while maintaining the rigor of your evaluation approach, or even potentially expanding or bolstering what it is you're able to do. And then what are some of the best practices here with combining AI insights with human expertise? And so we can go to the next slide. In the interest of time, I have some stories that I can share if they come up in discussion, but I want to make sure that my guests have time to speak as well. So with regard, where I've been focusing is on that last question around processes and protecting my own sort of expertise and point of view. And so I've been engaging in developing pretty thorough custom instructions for my AI tools that give it pretty strict guardrails around what it does when it interprets things, what it draws on from my own body of work. And I've been developing those in an iterative cycle. And you can find out a lot more about what it looks like to do those sorts of custom instructions in this awesome PDF that I have linked here. And I can talk more about it later if we have time. So we can go to the next one. So in the category of protecting data and managing liability, this is where things like understanding the terms of service that that exist for each of the tools that you might be using, what those actually mean and how to make sense of them is going to give you the ability to answer questions about where the data goes, and how it is or isn't protected. And really critically understanding what is owned by you in terms of the outputs and the products. So next slide. So if we continue with this sort of question framework, some questions that the clients might have, and these are questions that have come up for me in client conversations, are how will my organization's sensitive data be protected when using tools? This exact question I got, well, what are you going to put into it? And how will our data be protected, especially strategic level data? Will our data, whatever you put into it, be used to train the AI models? Who owns the rights to content that's generated in our reports and our deliverables? Does this comply with our data protection laws? And are there any legal risks or liabilities associated with using this? And so questions you would want to be considering from the consultant side and making sure you're able to answer would be around how am I ensuring that this data is protected, making sure you really understand the terms of service. Are there some app platforms that are better for handling types of information? What clauses should I be putting into contracts regarding ownership of AI generated content? How do I protect my intellectual property when I'm using these tools? How do I stay updated on evolving AI regulations? This is all so new and regulations are really lagging behind. So it's likely to change and evolve over the coming years. And how do I really assess and mitigate the risks with the benefits? So next slide. So for me, I have opted to add AI into my contract language. And I specifically narrowed down my AI tools to only 2 tools to use with client work. So that's Claude and Fathom. And so I had Caitlin, my lawyer, take a look at those 2 terms of service. And so I made the business decision to invest in her legal review of that and then to debrief me so that I could speak to it and help incorporate it into the contracts. And I think, that's really going to be a choice for folks because in some ways I was like, well, if I'm putting it in the contract language, am I inviting a can of worms that I really don't want to be opened yet? But I really feel pretty strongly that with AI, transparency is critically important. And so I wanted to use it as a moment to have a discussion at the outset, at the point of contracting, so that I knew the client would understand how I wanted to use these tools and that I would be using them, so that I could address that. And if it was going to be a problem, I know some folks potentially would charge more if you're not allowed to use some of these tools, because it does affect your efficiency. And so that was sort of my mental calculus in terms of why I wanted to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to invite Caitlin. We can go to the next slide. And what I asked Caitlin to speak for just a few minutes, like 3 minutes on, are what are the most critical legal and contractual considerations for consultants when using AI? And I will preface, like Matt often prefaces, that I know it's not official legal advice, even though it's a lawyer answering this question. So,
Thanks, Valerie. Hi,
yeah.
everyone. My name is Caitlin. So the name of my firm is Brevity Legal, and we'll see if I can keep this to 3 minutes because there's really so much nuance in this area. And Valerie's already touched on one of the most important pieces is if you are going to use AI tools in creating deliverables for your clients, you really need to read the terms of service. The terms of service are a contract between you, the user, and the AI tool, and it governs who owns the inputs and outputs. It governs what they can do with the inputs and outputs. It governs what you need to do as a consultant if you're using it. So the 2 biggest areas are, and I kind of have gleaned this from working with Valerie to work through the terms of service for Claude and Fathom. And I will preface this by saying terms of service are never friendly to the user. They are always friendly to the tool and the provider, the software provider. I draft them for clients. So, I mean, we want them to be as protective for the software as possible and give the software as much leeway as they need. And so going into it, you should know that they're not going to be on your side necessarily. Claude actually wasn't bad. If I remember correctly, Claude, you own the inputs and the outputs. However, Claude has a license to use whatever you put into it to develop their own goods and services. So you have to be aware, like if you're putting in a substantial portion of a project and Claude or the, whoever's running Claude decides that, hey, we could make a passive product here and sell it, they have free reign to do that under their terms of service. And if you don't read the terms of service, you don't know that. So another big piece about the terms of service is consent is very important. Every terms of service I've read as far as the AI goes is they want you to confirm to them that you have the rights and permissions to provide the inputs that you're putting in. So if you're using your client's information or your client's materials to develop a deliverable for them, you don't want to be using your client's confidential information. You don't want to be doing that without your client's consent, because the consent is so critical. You are representing to the software tool or the provider of the software tool that you have that consent. And if you don't, like, it can be problematic. And going back to the deliverables, Valerie's kind of touched on this, but this is a really big piece because depending, I know everyone is involved in different fields based on all of the intros I saw, but if you're developing a deliverable for the client's going to want to own it. They're paying you to create it and they want to own it. And if you are using AI, you need to make sure that you can transfer that title of ownership to the client and it's not a broken title of ownership because you put it into the AI and now they have it. However, even if the AI like Claude does not own the outputs, again, they retain the right to use it to develop their own goods and services, which gives them a lot of leeway. And one thing Valerie and I talked about is, are they actually going to make deliverables based on the kind of work that she's doing? Probably not. They're probably not going to build new goods and services because they're an AI company and they are developing their own technology. They're not going to go develop a whole DEI initiative for nonprofits, for example. But they still have the right to. So the terms of service are not going to be favorable to you. Definitely read them, and you should use that as a guide to limit or give you some guidance about what you can put in and what you can't. I'd say don't put any confidential information in at all. Change the names, redact what you need to. Definitely get your client's consent before you put in any client specific information. And just know that you may be giving up some IP rights in exchange for the efficiency that you're gaining by using the AI. And then one of the big takeaways on Fathom was you need to get consent when you're recording. And Valerie and I talked about how you can get, instead of getting a user's consent before you start recording, I would start the recording and reiterate, so ask them before you start the recording, of course. And then after you begin the recording, say, hey, we just want to confirm again, we're recording and everyone on the call is okay with it. And that way you actually have recorded their consent, and they can't come back and challenge it. So that's like our little tip about the recording devices. But I think that's all I can fit into 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Yeah, so I highly recommend talking to Caitlin more if you have more questions about that, because we've really gone through it quite a bit, talking through all the different scenarios. I did experiment with copying and pasting Claude's terms of service into Claude itself and then asking it to explain it to me like I'm 5, and also to give me different metaphors for understanding what the intellectual property is like if it's, a check deposited at a bank, explain to me where the data goes and all of that. So it was a really interesting, you can ask it to explain itself, which is just a tip for all AI use.
Before you go on, one thing to note, I've seen AI compare contracts before and review contracts, and I've seen it get it wrong. I've seen it call out things incorrectly. And the feedback can be very high level, and one single sentence in a contract can open the door for a lot of risk. and the AI is not necessarily going to catch it. And it doesn't, how does it weigh what's most important to you as far as risk allocation? It really can't. As far as I've used it, maybe as it evolves, it will. But I would use AI to review contracts to educate yourself, but I would caution you against relying on it.
100%. Thank you. All right, next slide. So I mentioned earlier transparency and client communication, and starting to feel kind of strongly that I think we're in such a moment where clients are going to be all over the map, feeling different ways about AI, either not caring, being all about it, or being really pretty skeptical and not wanting it present. And so I do think it's potentially an opportunity to build some trust in the work at the outset, talking through methods and how you work. And also possibly an opportunity to educate clients who might be less familiar about what AI is and how it works, an opportunity to educate them. And I am exploring a lot more the idea of AI through an equity and inclusivity lens. And so I think there might be even greater benefit to educating clients and colleagues around it when we start to consider some of those equity and inclusion ones. But maybe that's a 2025 topic chat. So next slide, please. So in terms of communication with clients around AI, so I did get asked what are the specific tools that I'm going to use and how am I going to use them? So being ready to have some answers to that level of specificity. And how will we know which parts of the deliverables are AI generated versus human created? And just to be fully transparent, I would never consider generating something and then just handing it off as a deliverable. That would be bad. And so everything that I've ever used that's been AI collaborated, I would say, has gone through so much additional editing that it's still very much mine. But being able to talk about that and even showing examples, I've done some side-by-side comparisons of my first draft, my AI draft, and my final draft in order to be ready for that, but also so that I understand what it's really looking like. Are they going to need any special training? And how can they ensure that the confidential information doesn't inadvertently end up in stuff? And will it be explicitly mentioned in the report, in presentations? And that's going to just be something that I think is going to be an ongoing negotiation. And then from the consultant point of view, really thinking about how I clearly communicate this without overwhelming them. So what's the sweet spot of information without it being too much? What's the level of transparency about AI that I'm going to use in my reports and presentations? How can I talk about benefits and limitations? What are the different protocols that I'm going to establish to maintain client confidentiality? So I de-identify everything in Word using some codes that I then save. And then when I put it in, I know it's de-identified. So what are going to be some of those protocols that you're using? And what resources that you found useful can you provide back when you're answering some of these questions? So next slide. So like I said, I did have a client who asked me those questions and I had to be ready to talk about them. One of the things I learned in some of my research about client communications around AI is being able to be specific about your uses and also communicating in terms of shared values around the work. There are ways that AI can introduce bias and obscure results. There are also ways it can check for bias and catch things that you might have missed. And so I think really being able to talk about collectively, we all want the best information that's going to inform our programs. So now I'm going to invite Brad. Hey, Brad, I see you came off on video. So we can go to the next slide. And I invited Brad to share some of his experience around communicating with clients around AI use and what that's looked like, and whatever else you want to fit into your segment.
My 3 minutes, ready, set, go.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Valerie.
Yeah.
I to build a lot on what's been said, I think Valerie has outlined really nicely the things that are important. And I think in my experience in communicating with others, right now, if we were all to pull ourselves on the pulse of AI in this group, we'd be all over the place. And we all kind of do the exact same thing. So now if you think about like a newer nonprofit, an established nonprofit, a government agency, a foundation, like just the spectrum of people's understanding and comfort and maybe excitement about AI is all over the place. And so I think I'm going to share 3 conversations that I've had with current clients and just give you a sense of how they felt about me using AI in my practice. And I think per the way that Valerie teed this up, there's a huge range of things that we can do with it. Rewriting a sentence or fixing grammar, Word does that already, and I doubt that that's in any of our contracts, right? So let's not worry about that use case. The other end of the spectrum is let's just take the entire focus group transcript and have a generated report and then hand it to the client. Let's probably not talk about that either, because I don't think any of us are going to do that. And so it's like in this messy middle where we're probably all finding appropriate use cases, that there's real conversation to be had. And so I think about things like developing a focus group script, doing some secondary research, maybe reading a report that I've written and asking it to write an executive summary or highlight what they're seeing in there so that I can understand my own voice in a report. Things like that, where there's like true tension, not like, yeah, of course, Word did that 5 years ago, I'm not worried about that, but also these like futuristic, doing the entire project with no human involved. Like I think the reality is many of us are somewhere in that messy middle. And so those are the conversations that I've had with clients. To position my response in the conversations that I've had a little bit, I don't have it explicitly written into any of my contracts that I'm using AI or which products that I'm using. The AI tools that I use are the big ones off the shelf. I've been experimenting this year. So I currently have Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, which is too many. None of us should have all of those. We should have 1, maybe 2 of those. And they all have different privacy policies. And I think Claude is probably the most, they champion their safety, but Copilot and Gemini are also part of huge global leading technologies, Microsoft and Google. And so you can trust what they say, maybe a little bit more than a ChatGPT or OpenAI that is new on the scene. They're just new in the last 5 years. And so like reading between the lines a little bit with all of these models, I think is helpful too. So now to my actual answer with the 1 minute I have left. I'll 3 scenarios. I'm interim director of evaluation at an organization, nonprofit here in Chicago, 20-ish million operating budget. I report to the CFO. They know that I use it. I brought it up explicitly with the person that I report to and the couple of people that I oversee. They don't care one bit. They just want to know that I keep delivering the work that I had before I was using AI. They haven't even asked if I'm uploading sensitive data. I'm not, but they haven't asked that question. They just want to know that the work moves forward and that we're meeting the things that we had originally put in the contract 2 years ago when we began working together. So it's a non-issue for them. As an organization, they have no internal AI policy. I think that there's people using it in little bubbles, but they certainly don't pay for any of the software internally as an organization. They're a Microsoft 365 based organization. So that's maybe one example on kind of like they're just wanting me to show up and continue to do the work that I do. They're not worried about how that gets done. The second example is me as an external evaluator with a younger nonprofit. They are maybe 4 years old. And I report to the IT director and I interact with the executive director fairly often on a monthly basis as kind of a check-in call, leading kind of all their internal, all of their evaluation across the organization, but in an external capacity just because they're a growing organization. They pay for a Copilot license, which is the Microsoft AI tool. And so they internally have some I would say early stages of like, hey, these 5 people have paid accounts. And so we are encouraging them to use. Me and my primary contact interact quite a bit on him using Copilot. within evaluation, as well as me using it on my end. And so they're very supportive of it. We do maintain data privacy, and I do talk about the things that I've been assisted with from the AI tool. So like, hey, I originally developed this script, this data collection tool while conversating with ChatGPT, for example. And so there's some verbal disclosure there. It's not being written in on the bottom of a report to a funder. It's not being put at the bottom of a presentation. If we do, they're doing a big symposium next week, and one of the presentations we co-developed with ChatGPT. It's not written anywhere explicitly on that. The third example is I am the external evaluator just for 2 grants that an organization has. They're large federal grants, multi-year. I've been on these projects for a while. They, as an organization, are very hesitant around AI. They're very worried about some of the ethical implications, the biases that are in there, how information is going to be used or used in the future that gets put in today. And so they're very hesitant about it. They know that I use it for some things, but with that particular organization, I'm a little gentler in the use cases that I have with it because it's their preference, right? And it's just, it's not like I am some giant company. There's 2 of us, me and one other person. So we just respect that client's preference not to use it. Again, nothing explicit in a contract between me and them. They don't have any internal policy. They just, as the humans in that organization, are more hesitant. And so we use it for less intense and proprietary things, more like brainstorming or thinking. And then a lot more of Brad's hand-on in the work that he does. I hope that helps. Those are my quick examples, and I'm over time, so I'll hand it back to you, Valerie. I'm around if y'all have questions.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, I've been trying to answer questions in the chat too. So I think we're almost finished. The last sort of bucket of things that I wanted to bring up were more from the consultant side of things. And specifically, like thinking about this as a digital transformation moment, and how are we going to adapt to using AI or not using AI, and certainly dealing with it with the organizations that we're working with and sort of where they are on their own AI journey as well. So really thinking about how you want to prepare for potential AI failures or limitations. There's a lot in the chat right now about Otter and transcribing. So not relying on it for 100% accurate transcribing, or what happens when it really gets something wrong. What are the backup plans that we'd want to have in place? So, sometimes that might just be the same as how you might handle any of your cloud stored data, but really thinking about the processes that you're going to have in place. How will increasing AI use affect my client relationships or business model? I think the business model effects are kind of the bigger one, especially as we start to do similar types of work and can generate AI tools that would help us with some of our own processes that we tend to do over and over. What are the skills needed to stay competitive? What training do I need if I want to integrate this into different parts of my work? And how can I stay up to date on the different advancements? So next slide, I think it's did I have, yeah, okay. And so, I last summer or last spring, I just started listening to some podcasts. And that sort of opened up a whole world for me in terms of understanding AI. And so, I think if we take a page from the habit literature around how can we sort of work this into where you normally get your news, or information, and sort of build in just what are 5 to 10 minute ways of staying up to date on AI. And so I spent some time compiling all of the things that I had listened to and read, and the people I follow on LinkedIn. So that's all there. It probably will be up to date and good for maybe another 6 months or a year, and then it's probably going to be old information. But in that, like, listen first, there's some really great podcasts where they're talking about some of these big issues, and I don't think those big issues are really going to change a whole lot in the future. it's more, all the ways that this stuff is happening. So I highly recommend, checking some of those out. There's some great folks on LinkedIn that are putting content out to make it really accessible and easier to understand. And yeah, so I think that's probably my last slide. And I know we kind of went a little bit long, and I want to open it up. There's a lot of great questions. I have not checked my professional. I have data privacy security coverage, and it's been on my list to see where AI factors into that. And so I'm curious what people are learning there. And I know Nina has experimented with Coloop, and I've reached out to them as well. And I'm going to use them on a project coming up. And then there was a question around ChatGPT and why I didn't consider it. Honestly, I was my background was in leadership before. I spent the last 8 years in leadership, and I listened to a few interviews with Sam Altman, and just got really uncomfortable with what was happening. And I didn't like the terms of service, and then I really didn't trust the company ultimately. So I use it um, for some sort of more benign things, or like not any sort of client specific things. I might use it, help me think about this or that. Like, so I do use it, but I don't trust it. And so I just was like, I'll just use Claude, and Claude is outperforming it on sort of the higher level tasks, graduate level thinking. So that made me happy. But I think, they're just different choice points. It's an extremely powerful tool, and really good at what it does. I just didn't trust it for client work.
All right, Valerie, let's go into the lightning round with the 2 questions I like to ask my co-hosts when I get a chance to,
Yeah.
or my guest hosts. So if you had the chance to do it all over again with your practice, what are some things that you do differently, or if you had to start out now, what would you do?
I do wish I had learned R. So to go back
Like R,
and,
huh?
well,
You're making
I
up for
so
it now, huh?
I know, well, but what I've experienced with Claude now, within Claude, you can produce artifacts, and artifacts are really cool. It might be like a document, a Word document, but they're actually these little, like programmable interactive things. And I actually just wish I knew a bit more coding and just the ability. Like, I don't have any idea what I would do with one of these artifacts. I don't know how to code it into like a website. And I wish I just had just a little bit more understanding of that kind of tech side of things, because I've found that it's getting in my way a little
So if you had
bit.
to start all over, you would make sure you get a little more of the tech side of things. Now, is now a good time to start a consulting practice?
I'm 8 months into mine, so I really hope so. If it's not, like, oh man, I made a bad choice.
All
Um,
right.
yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to pause there for everybody who's on YouTube. We'll see you all later. Everybody else stick around.